Hello, this is Arden Kirkland, and this is a little presentation about what I've been up to this semester. I've been taking my last class for my Master's of Science in Library and Information Science at Syracuse University. And this class is Planning, Marketing, and Assessing Library Services. So for that project, I've had the pleasure of working with Joanna DePasquale to study the history of women's education digital portal, which is now known under the title College Women. Now, for anyone watching this who isn't actually involved in the project, just a little background, it's a collaboration among the archives of multiple institutions, including Barnard, Bryn Mawr, Mount Holyoke, the Radcliffe Institute, Smith, Wellesley, and Vassar. These colleges formed the Seven Sisters, a group of colleges that originally opened in the 19th century with the controversial mission of providing women with a high-quality education. This portal aims to aggregate content from the archives of all 7 institutions. I should just mention that although this portal is a collaboration between the 7 institutions, my work for this project really was just focused on the perspective coming from Vassar as one of the contributors. I did have a wonderful opportunity to attend a group meeting at Smith College and to meet some of the other contributors and hear more about different aspects of the project. But just the scope of this class work really involved more kind of one-on-one communication with Joanna at Vassar, and also some great feedback from Laura Street, the archivist at Vassar as well. So the perspective really is from Vassar's point of view, and I'm very eager to hear feedback from some of the other contributors. As you're looking at this and at my final report, I'm eager to hear your feedback about aspects for your specific institutions that should also be considered. So again, for people who aren't familiar with the project, I've thrown in this positioning statement, and this is also a little flash forward to some of the marketing plan a little bit later. Basically, this is a short statement to sum up some of the most valuable aspects of the portal, so I'll just read this to you. College Women brings voices and images of early college women together with voices of current scholars of women's history. This digital portal aims to provide centralized access not only to primary source archival material, but also to interaction with a community of scholars, including archivists, librarians, faculty, students, and other researchers. Online exhibitions and essays created by members of this community will provide context for library content, sharing knowledge about women's history with a wider audience. The features of the digital portal increase productivity for faculty and student research and for work of archive and digital library staff. This digital library deserves continuing support to bring more voices of women from history the attention they deserve. So just to discuss for a moment the course that I've been working on this project for, this is a part of the core curriculum for the MSLIS program at Syracuse, and I was in a section taught by Dr. Megan Oakleaf. For this class, we did a lot of work with a kind of toolkit that she created called the Academic Library Value, the Impact Starter Kit. So we worked through many exercises to really examine different aspects of the institutions we were working with to then lead up to the final report for the class. And there's more information about the course on page 7 of my full report if you want to see more. So for the report, just a little overview, these are the sections, analysis of kind of current information, looking at current impact, and then some recommendations for future development. So that includes a lit review, which I won't discuss here, but I encourage you, if you're interested, to take a look. I found that to be really one of the most enjoyable parts for me, really digging into learning more about some of the aspects that I didn't know as much about. And then project plan, marketing plan, assessment plan. So as for where things stand currently, my analysis working through with Joanna and with Laura, and also sitting in on the meeting at Smith, which I was very grateful for the opportunity to attend. It was wonderful to really meet more of the people involved and hear more about all the kind of behind the scenes action. All of that really got me thinking. And for the class, I had to do a visualization, and this was one I added, kind of thinking about a static view of portals, digital libraries in general. Kind of this model of everyone working behind the scenes, the content as the interface, and users on the other side of that, and a real kind of separation, and the librarians and archivists really as invisible to the end users, versus a vision that is much more dynamic, much more interactive. And this is, thinking of how to try to visualize my ideals for the portal. This is what I came up with. More of an image of a circle, but not a closed circle, an open circle, a circle with room to grow, a circle that is inclusive. Really not any kind of hierarchical separation between the archivists and digital librarians, the faculty, students, community members, others, everybody, really thinking of the ways in which archivists and digital librarians will be contributors, but also will be users of the portal themselves in their own work. And similarly, that faculty, students, community members, researchers all will begin as users of the portal, but that we can aim for them to contribute back to it. So kind of everyone working together around this circle, and the content in the middle, that everyone's kind of looking in on it, but also looking across at each other. All the arrows kind of representing that interactivity in and out. And also you'll see there are little bubbles kind of at the bottom left and right about the idea of related current events, that as things come up at the different institutions that are somewhat related to some of the archival content, that there's an opportunity to share that with the wider community, provide a historical perspective for something that's happening on campus. This visualization is on page 19 of my report. So this slide was inspired by a part of the meeting at Smith. One of the contributors, I believe he was from Wellesley, made a really good point about the fact that a few years ago it was enough for a portal for a digital library to be just a bucket of stuff, a bucket of a bunch of content, but that now there's a higher expectation of different kinds of things that you can do with that content. So that got me thinking of, for this project, kind of the bucket of women, all the different kinds of content that we're looking at here. And that idea of the fact that with a digital library, there's always the challenge that you kind of have to fill the bucket first. It's hard to imagine what you can do with the content until there's a certain critical mass of content there. But really trying to constantly keep in mind how you're going to get the content back out of the bucket, what you're going to do with it, what are the ways that you want to be able to work with it in the long run. So in contrast to thinking about that bucket, I just like the idea of keeping the focus on the ideas of context and community. There's already been a lot of talk about the importance of curated content, also the plans for building in different kinds of researcher tools. And I think it's also really important to remember that really keeping a focus on that idea of communication among scholars. Another thing I found myself thinking about was the "if you build it, they will come" model. And I've got my little image from the movie Field of Dreams. Some projects really have that expectation that if they build the digital library and put it out there, that the faculty will come to them. And I think several projects have proven that this is a bad model. And it's really important to work on building a project with researchers, not just for researchers, not just waiting for them to come, but involving them in the process of creation and making sure that it's something that they're going to want to use when it's ready. So instead, the model that I envision, I keep seeing in my head this kind of spiral, starting with archivists and librarians starting to build a digital library, but then as soon as possible, really involving faculty and students, other kinds of researchers in building on that content, using that content, and that with each additional person that becomes a user, becomes a contributor, that at each step of the way it kind of grows, so that there's that initial content, putting it out to users, those users having the opportunity to become contributors and contribute back. And then when other people see them doing that and see the content that has been created, that gets more attention, brings in more users, then perhaps they're inspired to become contributors. There's this kind of cycle of growing and adding content, adding ways that the content is being very actively used, and the library just becomes a growing, very living, breathing, vibrant site. One aspect that Joanna and I discussed on a few occasions is the way in which digital libraries take data and then add value to turn it into information, often in the form of metadata. But for this project, I really was also thinking about the next step, how we go from data into information and then to knowledge creation. And so for me, that's very much caught up in this idea of the community of scholars. And so on this slide, I've added some of the many faces of the amazing team working on this project, so including the archivists and digital librarians working behind the scenes, the advisory board that are really exemplary scholars in their fields. So how does their knowledge come through? You know, that is really the added value of this project. So how can we make knowledge visible by making expertise and making the experts visible? Is there a way of putting faces on and around the content in the library to really help to know that this is a community of scholarship? Considering the current situation, the stakeholders are fairly obvious, considering the academic institutions that the portal is aligned with. One of the difficult things for me with this was wanting so much to really focus on the faculty and students and the researchers that will be users and hopefully contributors to the portal, but needing to keep in mind that without the support of library administrators and funders, that can never happen. So really, keeping them in mind as stakeholders. Also, for me, realizing the importance of the advisory board, I really see them as having a leadership role, not only with development of this, but perhaps with marketing aspects, that if they can model their usage of the portal, there will be people who will be inspired to follow them. In terms of institutional focus areas, again, the first two were definitely very straightforward. Again, really thinking of faculty and student interactions. Otherwise, I had a few aha moments, maybe you'd say they're duh moments. One was thinking about the importance of institutional diversity, just recognizing, looking at more informal communications, well, formal and informal communications at Vassar, but also at some of the other colleges, realizing how issues of all different kinds of diversity are really at the forefront right now on our campuses. But also realizing when I went to the meeting at Smith, talking to several of the other institutions, realizing that my work up to that point had been so much based on Vassar's involvement, but the fact that since Vassar is co-ed and has been for a while, there was a perspective that I was missing, and coming from several of the other institutions that are still single-sex women's colleges, realizing that there is an institutional focus area for them of looking at the future of women's colleges. So that is certainly an important aspect for all of them. Another really important aspect is the idea of the future of liberal arts education, as they're all small liberal arts colleges. But it's important to remember that just because something is an institutional focus area doesn't mean it's has to be a focus area of the library. They really are kind of separate things. But just realizing that the more closely a project is aligned with institutional focus areas, the more likely it is to maintain support from those different institutions. So it's a real tension to think about how that fits with the digital library and, how that influences decisions going forward. For the planning section of my report, there are 5 major recommendations that I discuss in detail. There are several additional recommendations that are presented but aren't discussed as thoroughly. And they're all on page 37 of my report, but also summarized nicely in a table in Appendix E. You'll see that all 5 of these recommendations are really closely tied together. The first is about the idea of targeting collection development, really looking at who could be using and really modeling use of the portal right away, and what content can be digitized and provided for them to immediately put to use. So this really includes very actively seeking collaboration with scholars. I think starting with the advisory board, starting with faculty at the 7 institutions that are making contributions, and really, being very proactive about making those connections. As a result of that collaboration, then really determining themes for exhibitions and essays, which we'll get to more in a minute, determining the themes that people really want to be using in their research, looking at themes that relate to institutional focus areas as well, thinking about institutional diversity, future of women's colleges, future of liberal arts education, and perhaps targeting content related to those areas as well. Then continuing with digitization, really trying to get to a critical mass of materials that users can work with. One thing as we get into assessment, the idea of kind of periodically along the way, looking at search queries in using analytics tools to see what are people coming to the portal and searching for and not finding. And that can help guide areas that maybe, should be a next digitization project. I hope that this idea of targeted collection development can help with the current planning for a grant proposal for CLEAR and for other future grant proposals for digitization efforts. I should point out here as well that each of these recommendations has a clearly defined outcome associated with it, and sometimes the outcome may seem a little farther removed from some of the actions of the recommendation, but it's really trying to kind of have the long-term big picture of what it is that we're aiming for in terms of impact. Also, I should note that these actions are discussed in much more detail, including a timeline and really specific recommendations in my report. The second recommendation is very closely connected, the idea of curated content. And this is something that, coming out of the initial usability testing, we've seen there's a real interest in having some more content that is really designed to provide some context for the rest of the content in the portal. Part of my approach to that, though, is really looking at creating that kind of content through faculty-student collaboration, so that really fits with those stakeholders, those institutional focus areas in several different ways. So both considering them as users, but also considering them as contributors, and giving them the opportunity to create and share their knowledge. So I think we're already seeing some great examples of this coming out of the Greenfield Center at Bryn Mawr. And it's interesting to note that there are some, at least at Vassar, there's some opportunities for internal funding to support student research assistance and student research projects, such as the Summer Ford Scholars Program. So looking to see if there are opportunities like that at other institutions, and funding sources that can support that kind of faculty-student collaboration. So some actions with this, there's kind of a technical side of it, including the aspect of providing a platform for exhibitions and essays. So, how does that fit into the architecture of the portal interface? What are the access issues for people working on that kind of creation? But also some editorial issues, really thinking of the idea of library as publisher, that this becomes, published content being shared with the world. So is there a need to form an editorial board, develop editorial policies? How would that work? That's a real area that needs to be addressed. But again, determining themes for these, kind of related to the last recommendation, and then providing ways for variety of faculty, students, archivists, librarians, outside scholars to come together to collaborate to create this content. Recommendation number 3 is really another kind of curated content in a way. The idea of 2 different aspects, the idea of creating subject guides, whether they're in the form of kind of like a LibGuide kind of format or annotated bibliography, but also related item links in the item records themselves. So again, there are some technical issues here. Creating those kind of links within item records, what is the structure? How does the technology support that? What is the gatekeeping to, and how do different contributors have access to enter those kind of links as they come up? Ideally, that really ties into some aspects of linked open data. How can those kind of structures be used to our advantage to develop these kind of links? But again, it's that idea of showing a relationship between the content in the portal and other scholarship, other content that exists in other places, and really seeing it as part of an interactive web of scholarship. So very similar to the steps for the last recommendation, seeking collaboration, determining themes, thinking of those themes related to institutional focus areas, finding support streams, funding streams for scholars of all kinds, archivists, faculty, students, to come together and develop these. Also, developing subject guides, to developing related item links as a part of the metadata. Looking at sources that already exist even on our own campuses. So for example, at Vassar, there's the Vassar Encyclopedia that has been very actively built by the, through the archive, through the Office of the Historian, through summers of Ford Scholars working and students contributing, doing research and adding content. There's a great timeline at Vassar that was created for the college's 150th anniversary. So how can content from those sources be related to content in the portal? And again, looking forward to assessment, thinking about that idea of, again, looking at the gaps. What are people searching for that they're not finding, and how can that be added back in? Part of the inspiration for my 4th recommendation came from an email I received with a call for proposals for workshops for the Alliance to Advance Liberal Arts Colleges. This is a consortium of a large group of different liberal arts colleges, which I believe includes just about all of the 7 sisters. I think all but the Radcliffe Institute are member institutions, among several others. So this is an opportunity, that's a funding source for faculty to come together and meet for workshops on different topics and to bring in speakers to lead different parts of the workshop. So that's one that kind of got me thinking about this. That might be one possible source of funding for something like this, but there might be other models to create this approach as well. So basically it's this idea of a faculty forum, really creating a time and a place to bring interested faculty together to really get some direct in-person collaboration from them about future development of the portal in terms of it tying into both their research, but even more so their work with students. So identifying, who are some of the top targets for faculty at each participating institution that are likely to interact with the portal and really seek their involvement to come together in a workshop like this, meet up with faculty from the other institutions with a few clear goals. And those would be, to develop some plans related to defining what would be student learning outcomes using material in the portal, developing lesson plans, how could they tie work with the portal into their curriculum, how could they guide student research projects that could possibly use the portal? Could they, as a group, create some rubrics for assessment of student work using these resources? So, really providing that avenue for them to come together in person and develop all of that. Then for them to go away and use all of that in actual courses. Really see how it all plays out, and then provide even more feedback. Refine those plans, share those plans with a larger public so that the other institutions can benefit as well and think about using this content with their students in addition. My fifth recommendation, the last of my detailed recommendations, is about increasing the visibility of archivists and librarians. And again, this relates to that idea of community and making expertise visible. So some ways of doing this, one really simple one is just creating a contributors page on the portal that has, not just the names and emails, but, brief bios and photos, really putting faces on the contributors. Also, considering kind of the marketing aspect of the blog, including archivists and librarians in that, perhaps scheduling a series of posts by them, introducing themselves, introducing their work at their different institutions. Another aspect that I think has already been discussed a little bit is, the idea of how will reference questions be fielded from the portal to individual archives and individual archivists. So, is there an Ask Us page that kind of functions in that way? How does that work? Is there even, will there be some questions, some kind of frequently asked questions that emerge that maybe there's maybe it's worth creating a structure for a knowledge base of just sharing some commonly asked questions about the Seven Sisters or about the individual institutions. But some other pieces of this, again, it really ties into the marketing aspect, really for archivists and librarians to be presenting both formally and informally on and off campus, really showing off their work with the portal, but also their work in general, and seeing how social media efforts can really kind of amplify this, spreading the word about all the great things they're doing and all the expertise that they are ready to share. This table shows 5 more recommendations that I mention in my report but don't address with quite as much detail. They are all a bit more technical in nature and all relate to issues that are already being actively addressed by the team working on the portal. So I decided that considering the scope of this report and the nature of relating planning, marketing, and assessment issues, that the 5 issues that I address with more detail are related more to the long-term outcomes, whereas these that are more technical are related to kind of interim outcomes that get us on the way to those long-term issues. However, I really look forward to following the development of the portal related to these issues around tools and metadata. Moving on to marketing, which I think is very challenging for librarians to devote enough time toward. My report includes detailed recommendations about marketing methods, including a timeline and action plan, a sample budget, and some mock-ups of a few of these methods that I mention here. I think the top marketing method may well be social media, and it'll be really important for the team to develop an editorial calendar, figure out who's going to lead the social media efforts, and really be creating content for accounts that represent the portal as a whole, but also considering how that can relate to accounts for each individual institution, and whether social media managers for the individual libraries and the individual institutions can help repost content, and how the accounts for the portal can respond to posts from the individual institutions, and really seeing it as a wider web of communication. Also, the idea of presentations. This has been already discussed in other sections, but that idea of both formal and informal, both on campus and off. I know there's been some discussion about different team members presenting at different conferences, and I think in terms of those kind of formal conference presentations, there are 2 aspects. Certainly to be presenting about the process of creating the portal, but also in the future, as we start seeing research products that are created using content in the portal, to really promote them in presentations as well, but also thinking about any opportunities, particularly on the individual campuses, to be presenting at administrative meetings, at faculty meetings, even setting up a table in the college center to promote the portal to students. When it's really ready for so wide an audience, thinking about ways of reaching them directly like that. Also thinking about the aspect of publications. So again, of course, thinking of professional journals, both for the process aspect and for the idea of sharing research products that come out of work with the content in the portal. But also, putting out press releases and getting some coverage in local media in the areas of each of the institutions, in alumni magazines, different things like that. The 4th recommendation here is just direct contact. So especially in terms of that outreach to faculty, thinking of the faculty being the first line of reaching a wider audience, that it's through the faculty that will reach students. It's through the faculty and their interaction that will reach other faculty and other researchers who will follow their model and follow their leadership. So identifying who are the people on each campus that would be the best candidates to get involved, whether it's calling them, whether it's emailing them, whether it's opportunities to see them in person at different meetings on campus, really taking advantage of those, kind of having an elevator speech ready to open up that conversation and then really keep it going. And finally, the idea of giveaway items, where there will be those conference presentations or opportunities on campus to maybe set up a table or something, to have some things to give away, to so people have easy access to the URL for the portal to find it again. So whether it's bookmarks, stickers, any kinds of things like that you typically might get at a conference. So all some aspects to think about. On to assessment, perhaps even harder for librarians than marketing. So this was the kind of newest part of the class to me, and the part that I really enjoyed learning a lot about, enjoyed really digging into the Lit Review and exploring lots of different case studies, seeing where different archives and different digital libraries have used different tools to assess how they're reaching their goals with their intended populations. So spent a lot of time looking at different examples of web analytics, and especially going beyond just counting page visits and things like that, really looking at ways of having that be outcomes-based, addressing what are the, given what the end outcomes are that we've articulated, how can we look at people's navigation through the portal and evaluate it related to those goals. Now, one thing that I found was really interesting, looking at several library but also museum case studies, there are several examples of using a simple, like a 1-question or maybe at most a 3-question survey that is kind of an entrance to the site, so that when a new user first approaches the digital library, just being prompted with a short question to identify not so much their demographic, not are you a faculty, are you a student, but more motivation. So what is bringing you to the site? Are you here looking for a particular piece of research? Are you here to browse? Are you here for entertainment purposes? What what brings you here? And then using that to help trace through and see once they're navigating through the site, and using analytics kind of based on segmentation of their answers to those, that quick survey, seeing are they hitting dead ends, or are they really staying with the site, and do they seem to be achieving the goals that brought them to the site in the first place. So there's some really interesting potential for that. Also related, related to the web analytics issue is the idea of citation analysis, and so in a typical researcher sense, that's been the idea of looking at impact factor of journal articles. But also, branching that out into webometrics, really looking at beyond just publications, looking at where the web content is being linked to from elsewhere on the web. And then altmetrics, really looking at a big focus on social media, so seeing where is content being mentioned, linked to in social media. So I think, again, there are two sides to this. The content from the portal itself, how is that reaching out and having an impact in the world? But then also, once we start seeing research products using that content, seeing, what is their impact? What is the impact of that research? And that kind of builds on a greater impact for the portal. Usability studies are already underway. There was already an initial test before this, the upcoming launch. So that was really helpful, and I think there's a good structure in place to follow to continue usability studies with each new phase of development as new features and new content are added. I think there was also some talk about having some kind of a survey linked to from the portal so that people can provide their feedback. And I think this, again, will be really important to, in terms of the survey design, to think about it in terms of those desired outcomes. So what is the kind of information that we really need to know about users to be able to track the how those outcomes are being reached. Also, in terms of that aspect of the visibility of archivists and librarians, tracking the research consultation requests that are related to the portal. And then the last one, I think, is kind of a reach, but was interesting to try to think about. There's so many claims about the digital resources kind of saving time and money for researchers and for archivists. So trying to quantify that in some way, looking at the costs per item digitized related to costs in the archive in person, comparing numbers of in-person visits to numbers of not just views, but really usage of items online. So there are a lot of different factors, a lot of different variables that are very complicated there to compare. But if there was ever a concern for that aspect of sustainability, that could be really interesting to try to evaluate. So to conclude, just thinking again about what we're trying to get into the bucket, but also that aspect of thinking to the longer term usage and the long-term outcomes that we're considering about how the content's going to get back out of the bucket and reach a wider audience out in the world. Thinking also, again, of that really interactive view of the portal, letting that idea of collaboration and interactivity really guide all the efforts and all the decisions moving forward with it. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the opportunity to really follow this project. I look forward to continuing to follow it into the future. For my plans to be actionable, they'll really need to be refined with the expertise of everyone on the project team. But I hope there's at least some little bit in this plan that I've done for the class that might be useful to work with and might help with the future of the portal, might help with some future grant proposals, perhaps particularly with the aspects of marketing and assessment. For anyone on the project team who's had the patience to watch all of this, I'm really eager to hear your feedback. The initial feedback I had from my in-person presentation with Joanna and Laura brought up some really important issues, and I really hope to follow up with more of you very soon. Thank you so much.